At the Law Review of the University of San Andres, we had the pleasure of welcoming Professor Dr. Erich Hilgendorf. Professor Hilgendorf is a faculty member at the University of Würzburg's Law School, an expert in criminal law, and the author of numerous academic texts and manuals. He was also part of the European Union's Special Commission responsible for drafting the Artificial Intelligence Act, the law that regulates this emerging technology within the EU. Thanks to the collaboration of Professor Dr. Sansonetti and the Law Department, we had the opportunity to conduct a brief interview with him. In the interview, we discussed topics ranging from the age of criminal responsibility in Germany to his personal perspective on the authors and schools of thought that have most influenced his work. This was undoubtedly a unique opportunity for our organization, and we would like to express our sincere gratitude to everyone who made it possible, especially to Professor Dr. Erich Hilgendorf.
Thank you, Dr. Hilgendorf, for joining us today. We want to ask you first, in Argentina, there is this ongoing debate about lowering the age of criminal responsibility for teenagers from the age of 16 to the age of 40. In Germany, as I understand, the age of criminal responsibility starts at 14, and then young adults can be judged, prosecuted as juveniles, depending on psychological factors. Do you think this method of lowering the age of responsibility is an effective method to fight against the juvenile crime and also recidivism in juveniles?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and we have a similar discussion in Germany going on that, because more and more youngsters are committing crimes. 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. I would say it doesn't make much sense to really punish a 12-year-old child, but sometimes it makes sense somehow to control such a child. And at the moment, at least in Europe, it's possible for the parents to say no to any kind of treatment. So you have a very aggressive child, but nothing happens. So the state cannot enforce any measurement. And in this case, punishment could be a solution, because when the state punishes, the parents cannot say no. But I would say this is not punishment in a strict sense. It should be a kind of treatment. And maybe there should be another solution would be better, a kind of obligatory treatment of a psychiatric kind for children. So I would say no punishment in the standard sense for children. This makes no sense, but maybe parents should not have the possibility to say, this boy is only 13 and you can do nothing, because children can be dangerous.
So I think that the key is the balance between the both the state and the parents. Okay, turning to a broader issue, in many Latin American countries, including Argentina, there is this tendency to punish with harsher sentences and also to punish more or criminalize more activities as a response to insecurity in general. I want to know, how is this trend for you in Germany, and also if you think it's an effective way of fighting against crime?
Well, I'm rather skeptical about having more and more punishments. In Europe, in Germany, there is a strong tendency whenever something really bad happens to have higher punishment. But one should know the criminals normally don't read the criminal code. And whether a specific crime is punished by 2 years of imprisonment or 5 years of imprisonment is totally irrelevant for the criminal, because he believes he will not be caught. Therefore, in order to deal with crime, you should look for other measures. Criminal law should be the last resort. I'm a strong supporter of the ultima ratio principle. And of course, it's more difficult to have intelligent measures, and it's easy simply to say we have a new law, a new criminal law, and we punish harder and harder. It's sometimes very problematic to find social methods that are really helpful. But our great criminal law Professor Franz von Liszt, he said, Sozialpolitik ist die beste Kriminalpolitik, or in English, social policy is the best way of doing criminal policy. So you have to solve the social problems, and then maybe you will get in control of the criminal problems. But simply to have more and more and more criminal law is not a good solution.
Yes. In your lecture, you talked about crimes committed in the cyberspace and the metaverse. What do you think are the biggest challenges for criminal law to regulate all these areas?
Well, I would say the one big problem is that these new forms of crime will be international. For example, let's talk about pornographic input. Somewhere in the world, somebody will produce pornography and bring it into the virtual world. But how to control this? We don't know this person. We have no the technical means to stop it. It will be very difficult to control that. Also, cases of fraud, of phishing, of fake news. So all the problems we know from the internet will double and be more and more problematic in the virtual world.
Is there any regulation in Germany that you think is effective for this?
At the moment, no. Only if the traditional criminal law applies. In my lecture, I try to make clear, to show what kinds of traditional criminal laws are applicable. There are not many. Some are applicable, but there are a lot of activities that cannot be gathered by criminal law at the moment. And I believe the lawgiver should do something. And there's a big struggle at the moment between Europe and the US. And the US, under the new president and his advisors, they don't want any regulation at all. That's our impression. They want to get rid of all kinds of regulation. And Europe, especially Germany, definitely wants regulation. And in former times, we tried to have some compromise or agreement, and both sides gave in a little bit. At the moment, it's a very hard competition. Sure. And then I mentioned in my talk, I was part of this EU expert group who talked about the leading values of the AI Act. And at that time, we said there are three types of regulation. As some states want to regulate AI in a way that it's good for government. And what we meant was, of course, China. And some countries there are that want to regulate AI that is good for big companies. And that's US, of course. And then some countries want to regulate AI and technology that's good for the citizens. We thought this was Europe. No? Of course, this is a bit naive. It's an exaggeration to see it that way. But I believe there's some true elements in this categorization. And
Thank you.
at the moment, these problems get more and more difficult to solve, and I don't know what the future will bring. But I'm really afraid of a virtual world that is controlled only by a few companies, and there's no democratic control at all. That would be a bad world.
Yeah. Okay. This question was made with the help of Professor Santinetti. So I'm going to read it because it's a little bit more personal. So just to finish, to round up the interview with a personal tone, it's some scholars emphasize the importance of intellectual influences in shaping legal thought. In your case, which authors and school of thought had the greatest impact on your work?
Well, one big impact, of course, Professor Santinetti. Yeah? But in my youth, I was influenced quite a lot by Hans von Liszt and this way of thinking, so that to solve societal problems, criminal law is not the number one solution, but you should look for social problems and solve these social issues. So Hans von Liszt would be important. Then I was educated in Tübingen, and they put a lot of emphasis on strict dogmatics, so step-by-step analysis. And we were taught to make very clear whether we did legal analysis or when we did open up our political perspective. Yeah? When I talk to students, I make a very clear difference between my personal, moral or political ideas and the dogmatic aspects. So this is also for me very important. Yeah? And then from philosophy, Professor Santinetti said this: critical rationalism, Popper, Albert, maybe in total analytical philosophy. And on the other side are philosophers like Hegel, for Heidegger, which I think are Karaba.
Yeah, we talked with professor before on mail that nowadays students generally don't pay much attention to that they only care about the dominant thoughts out in the criminal areas. Do you agree with that?
In Germany, there's a lot of competition between law students. So if you study law and you are successful, you can earn a lot of money. But those who are not so successful, they find it hard to have good jobs. So young people concentrate on the stuff they believe is relevant for the exam. And they don't look for philosophy, they don't look for history or political activities. They don't have the time. I think the people are as intelligent as they were 20 years ago, but there's much more pressure on them. And therefore they are selecting positions and perspectives that they believe will help them being successful in the exam. Yeah? And that's a problem. And theoretical discussions are maybe interesting for them, and intellectually they could do it. But they say, we don't have the time, and it will not be part of the exam, so why should we do it? And these problems, of course, arise because of the educational programs. And the professors want to change them, but in Germany, law is a state exam course. So the state fixes the program. We are in no position to change it. And therefore, I'm afraid the situation will remain as it is. And it's sad. And I believe if you're a good lawyer, you will be an important judge or an important politician, we should know more than purely dogmatical things. We should have some understanding of politics, some understanding of philosophy, of morals, of ethics, of intellectual background. And at the moment, we are not giving this to the students. I don't know how it is here in your country, but in Germany, I would say in the whole of Europe, it's a problem.
Yeah, I think that even though you might not apply it directly on practice, it's important to know all the different things about ethics and all those things. We also talked about how Germany had a golden age in criminal law in the last century, and now it seems as it didn't stop, but it's a little bit slower than before.
I would say it's a little bit slower, but the level of doing dogmatics is still quite high.
Yeah.
But there are other countries that are doing dogmatics as good as the Germans or even better. So I wouldn't say the Germans are less good than they were in the past, but other countries are much better than they were in the past. For example, the Spanish-speaking world. Yeah, I had a good friend of mine, Mr. Silva Sanchez, who's also a famous law professor, criminal law professor. He produces texts in Spanish, but also in English and in German that have exactly the same level as the best German articles or even better. So the Spanish-speaking world kind of is overtaking the German-speaking world in dogmatics. That does not mean that Germany is less good than it was in the past, but Spain and Argentina also they are much better than they were in the past. And the next competitor that is already coming is China. The Chinese are now really good in legal dogmatics, and they do it exactly in the way the Germans do it and the Spanish do it and you do it. And the Chinese produce texts that are really astonishing. And one big aim of me is organizing a conference with Argentinian participants, German participants, and Spanish participants, and Chinese participants. Maybe we can do it at this university in the future. If the deal says yes, we can do that.
It would be great. Thank you very much for the interview. It was an honor. Yeah.